it's also insanely unlikely that Russia's going to use a nuke in the first place. So if he's like, well, I don't care about that because it's insanely unlikely, them using a nuke in the first place is insanely unlikely, because what scenario does Russia use a nuke that ends up good for them? I would love to hear Alex answer that question. So Destiny had a debate about Ukraine recently with PlayingWithFire. This guy is like, I heard he was a dating coach. I don't really know anything about him, to be completely honest, but I was recommended this debate, and then I had a bunch of people not only like tell me about this debate, but I had my editor recommend me this debate. And if my editor is recommending me this debate, then that means I should watch the debate, because, you know, the editor, you know, he's got me on a tight leash. And so let's watch it. They go back and forth on Ukraine. I hear that the fear of World War III and world-ending nuclear fire is brought up during this debate, and that's a point of contention. So I'm very interested to see how Destiny confronts these ideas.
Okay, give me a minute. I'll be back, maybe. 1 sec. What? I didn't know we were doing this on your stream. What's up?
Not much. Well, that's what I was asking you. Do you want to come on my stream? You want to do Zoom? What do you want to do?
Oh, well, I'm here. Okay, hit me up. What do you got?
I was rudely ignored. No, okay. Yeah, let's get into the Ukraine thing. So do you want to sum up your argument, or do you want me to sum up your argument for you? You can tell me if you agree or disagree with it.
I can sum up my argument. Russia shouldn't be taking territory from anybody. It's pretty bad to do that. They don't have a good reason for it. And when people are trying to take territory from countries in fucking Europe, the United States needs to little bro them and show up and step up and fuck them up. Yeah.
So you're basically completely okay with Biden's foreign policy actions when it comes to this?
100%, yeah.
You don't have any any criticisms at all? Like, if you were president, there's nothing you would do differently?
With response to Ukraine, no, I think he's done a pretty good job.
The things I would have done differently, but a lot of this also comes with foresight, is I would have sent the aid sooner, so it could have had an impact on the battlefield sooner. And then maybe we could have capitalized on things like the Kharkiv counteroffensive, which accumulated through a breakthrough of the Russian line, when the lines were just too thin. The Russians were stretched thin. You know, maybe it could have been capitalized on more. Maybe the Ukrainians would be in an even better position if they got that equipment earlier on. Maybe we could have started sending lethal aid in larger amounts before the war even happened, when there was a lot of notice of this war possibly happening. We were sending lethal aid before, but we could have maybe sent even more. Like, all of my complaints towards Biden when it comes to Ukraine is not, oh, he's gone too far. It's he could probably do more here. It's all stuff like that.
I can't think of anything.
I'm just personally very surprised with the cavalier attitude so many Democrats and Republicans have when it comes to this. The main one is we're literally playing with nuclear Armageddon, which I find just scary as fuck. Every single general I've ever seen do interviews on this, including U.S. generals, have all admitted there's at least a somewhat of possibility of this whole thing escalating into nuclear war. Every single scenario that the military has played out, if there's one nuke that's released, always leads to full-on nuclear Armageddon within days, if not weeks. So, yeah, I mean, I don't.
It's not everyone agrees that if one nuke is released, therefore the entire world blows up. Now, let me be clear: if a nuke is released, we're in a very dangerous moment in history we've never been to before. Right? We've never been to that moment before, and we shouldn't mess with it. We shouldn't mess with that. That's why we shouldn't use nukes, and that's why Russia shouldn't use nukes. I am not particularly that concerned. Of course, there's some base concern because maybe the Russians could mess up and accidentally do something. There could be a disaster at the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. I was there. I saw explosions very close to that nuclear power plant, and that's right on the Dnieper River, so that could pollute the entirety of the river line, which hurts tons and tons and tons of farming communities and would pollute the locals. And I interviewed those locals, and I would really like them not to, die from radiation sickness. But I'm largely not concerned because the Russians have done nothing so far from either their rhetoric or their actions to indicate that they're preparing to do a nuclear strike. They do a lot of chest beating on Russian state TV and just vague signaling towards it, but they never make commitments. And that's the stuff you need to look to when you listen to the Russians. Look for commitments, because it's really easy to say, oh, the threat of nuclear war has never been this great, or, we reserve the right to use our nuclear weapons when our integral state is threatened. It's really easy to say that, because once you say that, you've committed to nothing. You don't have to do anything. You can say that to scare people and then follow it up with nothing, right? It's the North Korea treatment, where you scare everyone, but we all know North Korea isn't going to nuke the United States. Because the United States knows that if North Korea was to do that, North Korea would probably be wiped off the face of the earth. And I'm not saying that to be, yay, all the civilians are dead. I'm just saying that as reality. That if North Korea was to nuke the United States, the North Korea would not last long due to the response of South Korea, Japan, and the United States. And the fact that it would probably be very difficult for the Chinese to justify intervening on North Korea's behalf because they would have to go to war with America. And according to the people I've talked to, that's one of the few scenarios where China does not intervene on North Korea's behalf. But hypothetically, if we're using the standard of anytime there's a risk of nuclear war, we just have to back down, or we need to, like, you know, we can't be tough on an issue, then when every single time North Korea is like, you got to remove troops from South Korea or we might blow up the world, then we have to be like, well, I guess we got to listen to them. I guess we got to withdraw the nukes, even though all sensible reason, when we look at the North Korean perspective, would not end with them using that weapon, because they know that would be the end of their regime, and they're using the weapon as a deterrent from invasion. And so when we look at the Russian perspective on the use of this weapon, if they were to use a nuclear weapon in Ukraine and start a global thermonuclear war, the problem is it would destroy the world. And as much as the Russians might enjoy that concept in theory, they have one problem. Russia is on the world. So if the world blows up, Russia blows up. And they seem to love Russia. I mean, they love Russia a lot. It seems when you listen to the Russian state TV and the Russian nationalism. So it just doesn't make any sense. Not to mention, if the Russians were to expand the war through the use of a nuclear weapon, they've probably made the determination, and we have read reports that they have at the very least considered this, but they never followed through on anything, which leads me to believe that they considered this and came to the conclusion that it was a bad idea. Because not only could it end in global thermonuclear war, but in the scenario where it doesn't, there's a decent chance they start a war with other European countries, or more aid ends up going to Ukraine. And if they can't conquer Ukraine as is, how are they going to beat all of NATO in hyperdrive, now responding to Russian nuclear strikes? Do you think the West is going to respond to Russian nuclear strikes with, okay, we surrender, you dropped a dirty bomb in Ukraine? They can't. Because if they do, then that normalizes the use of nuclear weapons on the international stage. And what message does that say to North Korea? What message does that say to the people in Pyongyang and what they could use with that nuke on the people of Seoul? What type of message does that send to any other number of powers like Pakistan and India, or even the United States down the road? If Donald Trump comes in office 2024 after the Russians use the nuke, he's going to say, remember when I asked you guys about the nukes and why we can't use them? Which is a real thing Donald Trump said, by the way. He tried to ask the generals if he could use the nukes. Like, why do we have them if we can't use them? Well, now he can be like, hey, I want to MacArthur this situation. I want to use the nukes. And so there is going to be a coalition response to that. And if Russia can't beat Ukraine, how are they going to beat all of NATO? So they can't beat Ukraine, but they want to start a bigger confrontation with Ukraine, Romania, Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Norway, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Denmark, the United States, Canada, most likely Australia, most likely Japan, decent chance South Korea, now Finland, Sweden, and all these countries. They can't beat Ukraine, but they're willing to start a confrontation with all those countries on a much larger scale. It just doesn't make any sense. I know some people talk about, well, Russia has more nukes than the United States. And that is true. They do have more nukes than the United States. But we also don't know the status of the Russian nuclear arsenal. We see the status of the Russian military and how corruption has degraded it. So supposedly the second most powerful military in the world couldn't take Kiev or couldn't take Kharkiv. Kharkiv, which supposedly, according to the Russians, has deep Russian sympathies. I've been there, it really doesn't. But according to them, has deep Russian sympathies and is right across the border. They don't need to go through Belarus to take Kharkiv. It's right across the border. They failed to take it. They failed to take Kharkiv. But they're going to use nukes to take Poland, to take... It just doesn't make any sense. And they wouldn't only be fighting the American nuclear arsenal, they'd be fighting the French nuclear arsenal. They'd be fighting the British nuclear arsenal. Who knows? Maybe even the Israeli nuclear arsenal. Who knows? The alleged Israeli nuclear arsenal. It just doesn't make sense from the perspective of the Russians for them to use this weapon. Not to mention, when we talk about the multipolar world order, if you're Vladimir Putin, one thing is clear from this war, that they certainly can't defeat NATO or the Western world, whatever you want to call it, alone. They don't have the skill, they don't got the military power, they don't got the money, they don't got the game, they don't got the riz to do it on their own. So they need other powers to do it. This is where everybody talks about BRICS and all of that. If Russia was to use a nuclear weapon in Ukraine, if they were, this is the one scenario where China is going to completely stop any and all support to Russia and could possibly even extend into an oil and natural gas embargo. This is one of the few scenarios where that could happen. Where they could put, where they might even maybe they don't even go that far. If they were to just agree on a cap, that would be disastrous for the Russian economy, as they're trying to supplement oil and natural gas sales now that the European market has completely dried up. They're trying to supplement those sales in Asia, as they don't have the infrastructure in place to do it already. But then the Chinese say, we don't want it. Then the Indians, who probably don't want an emboldened nuclear-armed Pakistan to think that they could get away with dropping a nuke on New Delhi, they don't want that to happen, so they agree to it too. And now where are they going to go sell all their oil and natural gas? And, you know, I don't want to reinforce the idea that Russia is just a giant-ass gas station with a nuclear arsenal, but when it comes to trade with Russia and China, and it comes to this part of it, it kind of is. And if they lose that ability to trade these resources, the economy is going down. And we already saw that the ruble, which supposedly, according to the Russians, has been strong, but has been inflated artificially, it's already starting to crumble. And they want to worsen the economic situation that much more. Everything points towards them not using this nuclear weapon. In fact, you can even see how the Russians have changed their dialogue around the use of a nuclear weapon. While they're talking about deploying nukes in Belarus and stuff like that, and some saber rattling, when it comes to the actual deployment of nukes, as in launching them, attacking them, we have diplomats across the world, Russian diplomats across the world saying, no, that's not going to happen under any circumstances. We've seen the Russian government one day banging their chest about nukes, and then the other day they flip-flop and talk about we would never do that because we're a peaceful power. They're flip-flopping on it. That's not the type of rhetoric you see before a nuclear boom, an explosion, or something that would end the world. The type of rhetoric you would see, and this is the type of stuff you should be looking out for, before a nuclear strike would be something along these lines. If Ukraine invades Crimea, we will nuke Ukraine. Period, end of paragraph. If they invade Crimea, we will nuke Ukraine. They have not made a commitment like that, and the reason they haven't is they don't want to commit to something like that because they know about the world-ending potential and what that could mean to the end of Putin's regime. And so that's why they won't make a commitment on it, because they don't want to do it, but they want to use the nukes to saber rattle so they can possibly, through the use of fear, intimidation, and honestly, like a giant suicide vest in the international community saying, listen to me, I'm powerful, I'm strong, I'm still the mighty Russia. They're on the international stage holding the world hostage, and that's all they can do since their military is failing and no one respects them as a military power anymore. And we see other countries all throughout Africa, all throughout the world, canceling contracts with the Russian military industrial complex. We see Armenia getting railed by Azerbaijan as Nagorno-Karabakh is being isolated and blocked off from the rest of Armenia by Azerbaijan, and the Russian military can't do anything. We have the Azerbaijani military firing upon the Russian FSB in Armenia because they have lost their position in the international stage. And now we're saying, okay, we have the upper hand. We've got all the leverage. Now let's give it all up because Russia's panicking and falling back upon their nuclear arsenal, which we know in 99.9% of scenarios, they're not going to use anyway. If our foreign policy moving forward is just anytime a nation has nukes, we just gotta back down, never have a confrontation. All that's going to do is tell all the tin box dictators in the world, tell all the bullies, all the terrible people of the world, all it's gonna do is send a message to them saying, hey, if we get nukes, we can do literally whatever the hell we want. It's no longer just a weapon that we garner gain for ourselves as a deterrent. It's no longer just a status symbol. It's no longer something that you use in negotiations. It is now something that if you invade another country and then you fail, you can fall back upon it. The Soviet Union was much more powerful than modern day Russia, and they failed in the invasion of Afghanistan. 10 years of fighting in Afghanistan, some of the worst slaughtering Afghanistan has ever seen, makes the American invasion of Afghanistan, it's not even comparable in the levels of brutality. We did some pretty messed up stuff in Afghanistan. The Soviets, and it's like, did that on an industrial scale. If you look at a population graph of Afghanistan, it just dips for 10 years, and that's the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. No other war that Afghanistan has been put through is similar to that. They lost, and they never fell back on nuclear weapons. The Soviet Union, they would rather have the Soviet Union lose that war, which greatly contributed to the collapse of the Soviet Union, before they would deploy nuclear weapons in Afghanistan. Same thing for the United States and Vietnam. Hell, the last time it was really seriously pushed and considered at a high level would be Korea, and that was when only the United States had nuclear weapons, and there was nobody that could respond with nuclear weapons outside of, I think, the Soviets were developing it like roughly at the same time. So it was a totally different day and age, not comparable to today's modern geopolitical landscape. So just to give a broad overview of why I am not particularly concerned, and I think you can kind of tell I'm not that concerned, because I'm in Ukraine, the place that would most likely be the first to be nuked in one of these scenarios. So, I probably wouldn't be here if I was that particularly concerned. It's something that is concerning. I am concerned, but I don't think it's a high likelihood or something that means something that's so terrifying that we need to back down and let the Russians win. Because all that would do is encourage this type of behavior in the future.
I don't know, I guess my question would be, what percentage of nuclear risk are you okay with? Like 10%, 5%, 20%?
I mean, any percent, that would be on Russia. The answer can't be that if things are going to escalate to nuclear war, then not intervening now would probably increase the chances of that happening, right?
Walk me through your logic on that.
Well, because if they take over Ukraine, they're probably not stopping there, right? They've done similar actions in Moldova. They've done similar actions in Georgia. Why the fuck would they stop here if they get what they want in Ukraine? So why allow them to be in an even stronger position? The reality is right now their actions are unacceptable. Just because they have nuclear weapons doesn't suddenly make those actions acceptable. So we just have to navigate it as responsibly as we see fit, as we can.
Well, I think everyone agrees that their actions are unacceptable. I'm not saying
no, but that's not true. If you're saying things.
Somebody just asked me in chat, in gutter chat, how are dark-skinned people in Ukraine doing? This might be weird. I spend most of my time in Ukraine. I don't know why I say this is weird, but I guess percentage-wise, when you look at the Ukrainian population, is weird. I spend most of my time in Ukraine with actually like Lebanese Ukrainians, which is there's not a lot of Lebanese Ukrainians, but I became really, really good friends with a Lebanese family in Ukraine, and who fled Lebanon to get away from war, which is one of the most tragic stories you could possibly imagine. And they tell me, like, yeah, of course there's racism in Ukraine, but the way it's talked about in Russian media is not only an over-exaggeration, but is trying to weaponize a lack of knowledge of the politics and race relations in Ukraine in order to justify the brutalization of black and brown Ukrainians. Because if you're a black and brown Ukrainian, if Ukraine's getting bombed and torn to shreds by Russian invasion, that also affects you. And in many instances, it could possibly even affect you more acutely. So their experience in this war is they have different experiences because of their background and the different countries they could possibly go to. They, of course, face racism in this country. Racism is very real in Ukraine. Racism is a problem in Ukraine. But I have yet to also meet one that, and this is something that the Russians talk about all the time, like the denazification. I have yet to find a single one that buys into the denazification myth, or at all even can come close to even somewhat sympathizing with the Russian position on invasion. Definitely, since also the Russians are also notoriously racist as well, and the status of black people in Russia is no better whatsoever. This part of the world does not have many black people and brown people in it. That's part of the reason why I think it's a big issue, and also just like a history of racism.
Things like, well, nuclear war is kind of scary and that can happen. Then you're saying, oh, fuck it. If they've got nukes, they can do whatever they want. That can't be the rules.
No, so that's not my position. That's not my position at all, right? Okay. We agree that their actions are totally unacceptable. It's illegal war. There's massive human rights violations. There's massive war crimes. We agree on that.
Okay, happy we're not talking to like the Yankee Tanky today. I'm happy Alex here has a brain cell.
question is, what we don't agree on is how we, as the U.S., should handle it, right? That's where the disagreement lies. Your position is that, well, we should send them about $100 billion worth of weapons.
My position is double that.
It's like, hey, we should send them like aid, and maybe initially we should send them some weapons so Russia doesn't completely steamroll them. But at this point, we're literally just getting closer and closer to the line of nuclear war, and should be really careful with that because, okay.
When we say that we're getting closer and closer, when people say that, how are we getting closer? How are we closer to nuclear war than when we were, like, for example, it's April, say a year ago, April of last year when we were sending the weapons, and Russia was initially, when they were starting to mess up, pounding their chest about nukes, and that was originally when everybody was really terrified. It's been a year since then. How are we closer to nuclear war from April of last year to today? Honestly, not at all. You know that stuff people are talking about now, the Belarus stuff, the putting of nukes in Belarus, that's the one thing that people talk about? That was announced in April of last year. That while it's getting talked about in the news again right now, because they're actually possibly doing some of the planning into it, and they're doing some of the training to deal with that, that was announced like way a long time ago. We are no closer to nuclear war now than we were 1 year ago.
Let me rephrase it like this. What do you think is the primary priority of the U.S. president?
The primary, I mean, I'd probably say the protection of the United States.
Yeah, exactly. The primary protection of the United States. So if there is even a 1% chance of nuclear war, and every single general I've ever seen do interviews says that there's a chance of that, then the U.S. president's failing in his job by increasing that chance, right?
Okay, so if that's the case, then JFK should have just been like, yeah, you can have nukes in Cuba. I mean, obviously, it's a risk to American security to have nukes right off, right there. It's kind of scary to us. But, if we were to confront you on it, there's a possibility it could spiral into a conflict. Or, we could be supporting like rebels in these areas, but we might have a conflict with another nuclear power, so we won't do it. We won't do anything ever that could ever upset a nuclear power. Like, every single time there's a confrontation between a nuclear power and another nuclear power, there's going to be some amount of risk. Every day India and Pakistan continue to exist, there is a risk of nuclear war. There is some risk. Every day we continue to support South Korea, there is a risk of the North Koreans hitting the button in and going over the border and blowing everybody to smithereens. It's a tremendously low risk, and this is part of the reason why eventually humanity should pursue the abolishment of nuclear weapons, even though we're not, sadly, we're not anywhere close to that. We had some treaties, but now the Russians are deciding they're going to tear them all up. The idea that anytime there's any risk at all of nuclear weapons, that the U.S. president just needs to, reverse course, here's a scenario. Russia says that they're going to nuke America unless we give them California. What do? Now, odds are it's a bluff and they're not going to take California. They can't take California. They don't even want California. Odds are it's a bluff. There's a very small percentage chance Putin's actually gone crazy. He took a bunch of LSD. Actually, no, what's a better drug for this? He smoked some PCP and he's decided that California has always been rightful Russian clay. There's a small chance. Does that mean now we have to give them California to avoid this scenario? No, not only because this gives up the freedom of Californians, just as we would be giving up the freedom of Ukrainians, who, by the way, when we give up the freedom of Ukrainians, we're not just giving up the freedom of Ukrainians when we sign away territory to the Russians and we force the Ukrainians to sign away territory to please cursory observers, but we also sign away their lives, as we've seen from the mass graves that have popped up in not only Bucha, but in Izium, which uncovered the largest mass grave in Europe since the Yugoslav genocides in the 90s. 440 bodies. And when I talk to Ukrainians, that's how they talked about it to me. They say that if we give up Mariupol permanently, we're signing away the lives of so many people. We give up all this territory permanently. All these people not only are not allowed to be with their nation, not only are they not allowed to have their freedoms and be in a functioning democracy and be able to reconnect with their families, not only do the children that Russia kidnapped will permanently be kidnapped and they'll never be able to get them back, but many people, many more will die. And if you think I'm exaggerating, the Russians themselves called the operation they were engaging in the Kiev Oblast a cleansing operation. Their word, not mine, where they went door to door shooting people associated with the government or the military. They didn't get to kill it like all the people they wanted to, because obviously the invasion did not go as planned. But this was something the American government was talking about before the invasion happened, and people called it propaganda. I even thought it was hyperbolic. I didn't even really believe it until the evidence has become overwhelming at this point that is real, that is happening, and that is something that they engaged in the Kiev Oblast. And we have no reason to believe that they haven't engaged in similar behavior all across occupied territory, because they've engaged in torture and extrajudicial killings in occupied Ukrainian territory even before the February 24th, 2022 invasion.
Like if the number one
that line of reason essentially leads you to a world where nuclear powers can infinitely bully nearby countries and there's no recourse. Because if let's say that I grant what you're saying, then what do we do if a nuclear power acts in an unjust way somewhere? Are you never allowed to do military intervention against them?
Wait, say that again. If a nuclear power does what?
If a nuclear power is bullying or stealing territory from countries around them, are they just allowed to infinitely do that with no intervention?
Well, no. I think the role of the U.S. should be diplomacy, and the U.S. actually has the power to end this war within weeks.
How?
With massive leverage. Okay, this is what the U.S. This is what I would do if I was president.
Okay, here we go.
I would go to Ukraine. I would go to Zelensky and say, "Hey, we're going to stop giving you weapons unless you come to the negotiating table." Then I would go to Putin. I would say, hey, we're going to keep giving Ukrainians weapons unless you come to the negotiating table. And then you settle. You use the role as a mediator. So the U.S. shouldn't be getting involved in this war through a proxy. The U.S. should be taking a neutral role, being a mediator and trying to end this war. And then at the same time also providing humanitarian aid to Ukraine and helping the people rebuild, maybe taking
sure, but the problem is Russia.
Not directly provoking Russia.
Sure.
Okay, the problem is when we talk about, okay, people want peace, but I think a lot of people don't know what even peace is. And what I mean by that is people view peace and war like in a very a kind of strange way. For example, peace in this is a war in this scenario is, buildings getting bombed, military formations fighting, and the Ukrainians fighting back for their liberation with a promise to the people in occupied territory that one day they will come to them and they will liberate them. Peace in this scenario would be the Russians get to keep Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson, and they get to do with it whatever the hell they want. Because that's what the Russians would demand. Because that's how Putin would save face with his country after botching this invasion so poorly and being unable to stop the expansion of NATO, which was one of the original stated goals, but now Finland's in NATO, kind of got cucked on that, right? He would demand that Ukraine is not allowed to join any other alliance structures and be demilitarized, making it so it'd be easy for him to invade Ukraine again in the future. These are the Russian demands. These are the base Russian demands. They say that's the base level if you want to enter negotiation with the Russians. Now, just talking about the occupied territory, is it peace if they're engaged in cleansing operations, going door to door, killing the people who might be a problem down the line? Is it peace if they're stealing children from their mothers, and they're stealing children from Ukraine, deporting them to Russia, making them learn Russian, forcing them to be Russian, accept Russian citizenship, and drop their old identity, and then using the children to then justify, through propaganda, more kidnapping of children? Is it peace if they're not allowing the people to return to their homes that have been displaced and are instead replacing them with Russian colonial settlers because they know that people who could come back might have some sympathies with the Ukrainian government and might have some apathy or some more anger towards the Russians who bombed their homes in the first place? Is that peace? Is it peace? If it is peace, it's a pretty wicked and crooked type of peace, a peace that will not last, and an unjust peace. And this all is under the assumption that the Russians will abide by their word. Because if we do negotiate a neutral Ukraine, which the Russians are demanding, I find it hard to believe that this negotiated settlement currently would also mean that Ukraine could join NATO. Right? I don't even know if this guy would support such a thing. But what would stop the Russians from licking their wounds for 5 years after signing this agreement and now launching another invasion to take more territory or to try to conquer Ukraine again? Because 5 years from now, do you think all of the international community is going to be as responsive as they were this time? What if Zelensky isn't in office anymore and he can't use his media training, can't use his skills that he learned while being a comedian in order to garner international attention on Ukraine and help them in their struggle? What if the world is just like, That's a 2022 thing. That's not a 2030 thing. We don't care anymore. That's happened with a lot of issues. A lot of countries where people like it's a fad for like a year or two, then people move on, you know? This is where the whole current thing meme comes from. What stops the Russians from invading again? So when we talk about negotiating, sitting the Russians and the Ukrainians down right now, their positions are going to be so radically different, with the Russians demanding the demilitarization of Ukraine, Ukraine not entering any alliance structures that could protect them after said demilitarization, as well as a recognition of the annexation of Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson. That's the Russian position. And you know what the Ukrainian position is? Leave our country. These are so totally different positions. Totally different positions that you're not going to get them to agree on terms. And especially the Ukrainians, when you think about it from their perspective, that they've retaken over 50% of the territory the Russians have captured in the February 2022, since the February 2022 invasion. In their mind, they're on the front foot. Everybody's preparing for the Ukrainian spring counteroffensive. So we're about to possibly view the Ukrainians liberating tons of more territory. They have a real shot at liberating thousands upon thousands of square miles of territory from Russian occupation, from Russian oppression. We're going to tell them, never mind, negotiate now when you have this leverage. It's just silly. It's just silly.
Russia's not going to probably accept an exit to the war that involves them ceding back all their territory to Ukraine. Ukraine's probably not going to accept an end to this war that has them like not restoring their 1991 borders.
Okay, let me ask you this question. What do you think is a better alternative for an American citizen? Number one is that Ukraine loses some of its territory. Number two is that there's nuclear Armageddon and everyone dies. Like, which one of those?
Those aren't the only two options.
Those are the only two options. Either the war. Do you know how silly that sounds to Ukrainians, by the way? You cannot continue to fight the war that you're suffering, that you're the main sufferer of. You know, Americans aren't the main ones suffering from this war. It is Ukrainians that are the main ones suffering from this war. You cannot, you're willing to fight for your liberation. You know, you're willing to have your 1776. You're willing to go through that. Or this is more of an 1812 moment when you think about it. You're willing to have that 1812. You're willing to defend your country. You're actually winning in many aspects against all odds when you were supposedly fighting the second most powerful military force in the world. But you can't continue fighting, and you have to give up your land, because if you don't give up the territory that you were allowed to have 9 years ago, then the world will explode. You know how silly that sounds to Ukrainians? It's unbelievably.
Options. They could take over Ukraine, and there could still be a nuclear Armageddon afterwards, right?
But we're talking about odds. Like, why would there be nuclear Armageddon?
Sure, we can go odds. Why are we only considering Ukraine? What if they want to fuck with Poland next? What if they look to NATO members next? Or what if they look to the other non-aligned countries around Ukraine?
Well, after this war, that's insanely unlikely that Putin is going to venture into a NATO country.
Not into a NATO one, but what about unaligned countries?
Okay, it's also insanely unlikely that Russia's going to use a nuke in the first place. So if he's like, well, I don't care about that because it's insanely unlikely. Them using a nuke in the first place is insanely unlikely, because what scenario does Russia use a nuke that ends up good for them? I would love to hear Alex answer that question. What scenario does Russia use a nuclear weapon in their wargaming of this scenario where it ends and they're like, we're in a better position now than we were before?
Like,
There's about Moldova. There's one of the few, and then Finland is just joining NATO. So there's literally like Moldova left.
I mean, there's Eurasian territory as well, right? Like they did the same thing in, I don't know.
Well, first of all,
oh, hello.
That
Wait. Your thing just glitched for a sec.
Yeah. Well, that's why I'm okay with initial military. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, that's why I'm okay with a little bit of initial military support to the Ukraine intelligence stuff, because if Putin bulldozed through Ukraine, then there's definitely a chance he could have gone to another country. But at this point, Russia has been humiliated. Russia has been bankrupted. The Russian military
is but only because of how aggressive. Only because of how aggressive the U.S. help has been so far, though. Right.
That's true. That's true.
That's something that's contributed to it. But at this point, what we're getting at is basically Ukraine is slowly starting to take back territories, right? And it's going to get to a point right? Especially the U.S. keeps upping up the ante and giving Ukraine more and more aggressive weapons, right? We're giving them tanks for the first time and stuff like that, right? So we're getting pretty close to giving them like the most significant weapons, which
yeah,
would be
but
like
I understand what you're saying. Okay, hold on, wait. Your rationale right now is that we should stop doing what we're doing because it might escalate to nuclear war, correct?
Also, I'm not mad at this. I'm not like super angry or whatever. I just get really passionate about this, obviously.
Yeah, we should instead be the mediators.
Yeah. Now, we agree, though, that Russia is the instigator, right?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Why wouldn't Russia, if we use this rationale?
Also, can I just say, if we are a neutral party here, what leverage will Ukraine have in negotiations? If it is known that we are telling Ukraine, we're going to stop giving you weapons, or if we stop giving them weapons, or in his world, we only gave them a little bit of weapons at the start, what leverage does Ukraine have in negotiations that they could look at the Russians and be able to walk away? You want to know when you have really like decent leverage in negotiations? When during negotiations at the end of it, you have the option to walk away and try other options. That's what really gives a party a lot of leverage. Military power, tanks, planes, artillery, guns, all of that, military force, that is leverage in negotiations. There are books, I think like Arms and Control, that have been written on how weapons and munitions, most of them are never even used, but they are used in one way, and that is in negotiations and in diplomacy and hard power politics. And so without the United States backing, what leverage is Ukraine going to have in these negotiations?
Yeah, we should instead be the mediators.
Yeah. Now, we agree, though, that Russia is the instigator, right?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Why wouldn't Russia, if we use this rationale, just invade Poland?
Because that's a NATO country, and because
but who cares? If we
Poland,
do anything, it'll escalate to nuclear war, and we don't want to do that, right? So we should just give them Poland, right? Because why would we intervene at all? It would escalate to nuclear war, even if Russia's the aggressor there, right?
But that's a red herring argument, because Russia, the chance of Russia invading Poland is like close to zero.
People
like
thought the chance of them invading Ukraine was close to zero.
No, everyone knew that this was going to happen. This was not secret.
No.
This is revisionist. This is unbelievably revisionist. The American government said it, but everybody else laughed in their face. Remember Hassan, when he was talking about this, he was like flipping his hair back. Day 4 of Russia not invading Ukraine. Oh, wow, big surprise. American government lied, huh? Like, he was like having so much fun with it, right? And it wasn't just him. I'm just picking on Hassan because it's easy to pick on Hassan. Tons of people made this prediction. Scott Ritter, Jackson Hinkle, like those are like Russian stooges, but you can go to more mainstream media examples as well. There's tons of people who didn't think this was going to happen. Most of the world thought it was like too crazy of a scenario to be true. A lot of analysts said Russia won't do this because it would be insane for them to do this. It would be absolutely insane. There's a decent chance it couldn't go well. But then it happened. And then Russia not only did it not go well for Russia, it was a disaster for Russia. It was a complete disaster for Russia. Completely underperformed on every level. And so, like, no, it wasn't that everyone knew this was going to happen. It was just the American government saying this.
No, hold on. That is not true. It was highly controversial in the days, weeks leading up to Ukraine. Even the own Ukrainian president, when the U.S. was releasing intel saying there was going to be invasion, people didn't know. Putin had been threatening this invasion for years. It finally did happen, but it was still controversial. Like not everybody knew. Okay,
it was controversial, but it wasn't out of the blue. I mean, Putin fucking.
It wasn't out of the blue. I agree.
Well, Putin invaded Crimea in 2014, right? So he had a history of invading Ukraine. He's been talking about it. He's been constantly threatening. He's saying, "Hey, this is my red line," and then he finally did the thing that he was promising for decade. The thing
for
that
8 years, a decade, 8 years earlier, right?
Okay, North Korea has threatened to nuke America for like 20 years now. So does that mean that like we need to now like cave to North Korea because they've been making these threats and one day it might accumulate into something because hey, they were sending signals. Like, we didn't know if they were to do that, it would be a complete curveball. Nobody would see it coming if North Korea actually did it, because we see it as a deterrent. We see it as chest beating. So just because they've been threatening it for a while doesn't mean that everybody like knew it was coming or that it was a very likely possibility. It really came out of left field. Not like out of left field, but most people did not think this was going to happen.
No, he's been talking about this forever, dude. Like, he's constantly talking about the need to prevent Ukraine from joining NATO.
Sure. I'm not.
Yeah, but he achieved that. He achieved that in 2014 when he invaded. He didn't even need to invade Ukraine to necessarily stop them from joining NATO. As long as Hungary or Turkey or any one country was against Ukraine joining NATO, they weren't going to join NATO. And the Germans and the French were against Ukraine joining NATO, even before the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2014. And then when the Russians did invade Ukraine in 2014 and they annexed Crimea, now Ukraine has a territorial dispute with Russia. And now, and since they have a territorial dispute with Russia, they can't join NATO, because one of the rules of NATO is you can't join NATO if you have a territorial dispute. And so Russia already had that on lock. And so a lot of people was like, what's the purpose of them invading if they already have that on lock, if Ukraine already can't join NATO?
This is not that big of a surprise for like American intel. Like I saw there was an interesting podcast with this I forget what his name is, but he's basically a policy whatever.
People didn't think he was going to invade Crimea, right?
No, like every single person who studies this stuff, foreign policy, wasn't really surprised that this happened. This is something. Okay, we have a guy who's been talking about doing something. He kind of does it, and then he finally does it.
I understand what you're.
I mean, okay, Kim Jong-un's been talking about nuking America forever. Then he nukes America. Nobody's really surprised. Are you kidding me? Everyone would be surprised, right? Because just because somebody says they're going to do it, if somebody says they're going to do something for years, then in fact, let me say something. Let's say that I said for 8 years I was going to start working out. Every day I said, I'm going to start working out. I'm going to start working out. If I actually one day showed up, I was like, here's my six-pack, everyone would be surprised because I've talked about doing it for so many years, but it just seemed like it was all talk and no game, you know? All talk, no action.
Okay, I don't know if I want to dig back to sources. I did a lot of research for the Ukraine shit. What you're saying is not true. There were a few people that called it accurately.
Also, Putin himself was never saying, oh, we're going to invade Ukraine. We're going to do it. In fact, Putin, a lot of times he was like, no, we're not going to invade Ukraine. We're not going to do it. And his government officials were saying, even up to the last day before the invasion, we're not going to do it. They're sending the complete opposite signal in the public eye, despite troop movements.
And there were other people that said there was no way that this invasion was going to happen. The foreign policy experts were all over the fucking board on whether that invasion would happen or not. And that was after Crimea. Crimea was even more unexpected. But the whole Crimean invasion, like, holy shit. Like, they went and they stole the peninsula. That was wild. But so I don't think that it's like, I don't even know why we're arguing this particular point. But
well, okay, whether it was expected or not, I think is not even that, is kind of a side tangent. We can agree to disagree on that. But the point I'm talking about is,
what did he want to agree to disagree on?
But so I don't think that it's like, I don't even know why we're arguing this particular point. But
well, okay, whether it was expected or not, I think is not even that, is kind of a side tangent. We can agree to disagree on that. But
it is a side tangent, but I don't really think it's something that we can agree to disagree. Most people didn't see it coming.
The point I'm talking about is, let me rephrase the question like this.
Sure.
Do you think it's more likely that this current line of direction we're going in, which we're basically progressively giving the Ukraine stronger and stronger weapons, is going to lead to nuclear war? Or do you think it's more likely that us not giving them weapons, right, and Russia basically coming to a standstill and eventually having to negotiate with Ukraine, and then I guess somehow invading Poland is more likely to lead to nuclear war? I mean, one of those seems to be, I'm not saying there's zero chance. There's always a theoretical risk.
I think that defending Ukraine is less likely to lead to nuclear war. I think I think defending Ukraine is less likely to lead to nuclear war. I think showing Russia that they can steamroll other countries and steal territory from them, I think it weakens U.S. leadership. I think it makes us look weak, and I think it weakens the trust that NATO countries have. And
you see how he was smiling for a second, like, oh my God, that's so ridiculous. And like the smile like slowly faded as Destiny started to make a coherent point.
Even our ability to defend other countries. I understand that Ukraine is not a NATO country. It's hard to imagine that Russia would ever attack a NATO-aligned country. However, I mean, like...
Okay, so I don't really know if someone was to put a gun in my head and say, like, does us sending Ukraine weapons increase or decrease the rate of risk of nuclear war? I can't say concretely, because there's a lot of different ways to look at it. But let me give you one way to look at it, which is the way that I'm pretty sympathetic to. Russia has invaded Ukraine, and in the process of invading Ukraine, they have beat their chest a lot about nuclear war, right? The Russian state TV has been even more verbose than even the Russian government itself and the type of statements that it releases. Now, if we were to say, look, we were going to send you weapons, Ukraine, but, you know, the threat, it's pretty scary. So we're actually not going to send weapons, and we're going to force you to give the Russians territory. We're going to make you do it. You have to give up this territory, and the Russians need to get something out of this. What type of message does it send to the international stage? You can bungle up no matter how bad and invade another country, you can have the worst invasion plan in the world. Give all you guys sticks, march them in, and they all die. If you have nukes to saber rattle, you're gonna at least get something because the world's scared of you, and everybody's gonna tuck their tails in and run away. Do you think that's going to encourage more or less tin box dictators to make a mad dash to get nuclear weapons so they can settle all of their historical territorial disputes?
If we're going to use the argument, if Russia knows that the United States isn't going to intervene in Ukraine because then that might mean nuclear war, why wouldn't you make that same argument for every single NATO country?
Well, right now Russia is completely fucking depleted. They're not going to be going into any more wars for a decade.
Yeah, you keep saying that, but you say that after you said Biden has made missteps. The only reason they're completely depleted is because we've been so aggressive in our support for Ukraine.
But I've said like
that's true. If we held his position at the start, Russia would not be nearly as depleted. And if we forced them to negotiate much earlier, then they would have a lot more resources to either invade Ukraine again in the future and or another nation.
3 times that I'm okay with the initial weapons aid. I'm just saying we're going
the initial weapons aid, but on what scale? On what scale? Because it's not just the initial weapons aid. For example, let's say, well, we give them a howitzer. It's not just we give them a howitzer. That howitzer needs ammunition. Something we need to continue to give them ammunition in order for them to continue to be able to use the howitzer and give them the parts necessary and the training necessary to not only use the howitzer, but fix the howitzer. Same thing is true about the HIMARS. Same thing is true about any weapon we give them. And so, like when we say like, oh, the initial aid, it's like military aid is not as simple as here's one deployment, goodbye. Unless it's not going to be a lot of good, strong military aid. We want something that they can use for a while that can give them leverage, not just something that, just maybe can somewhat contribute to the defense of the capital one time.
Going way too far now. Like now we're at a point where the war's about a year in. Russia is completely humiliated, depleted. They're looking for a way out. Putin has at this point said, hey, I'm looking to negotiate. I want a way out. He's basically saying, please, for the love of God, give me an out. I just want an out. I want to make some kind of a deal that doesn't make me look like a bitch to my people where I get like fucking executed, but I can get out of this mess because it's not looking good, right?
He should look like a bitch.
Let's give him an out. Let's give him some.
No. Why would you give him territory? That's a dictator. That's a rule.
I don't want to die. I want to live. I want to at least hit 1 million subs before I die in nuclear Armageddon.
Okay, I think that I don't think that we should allow a country to take.
Can I say this is bitch mode? Like, I don't want to be a jerk because, like, obviously nobody wants to die in nuclear Armageddon. But the idea that like every single time like nuclear states collide in any way, we're all gonna just be like, the world's gonna explode. Anytime we should be viewing a lot of these statements similar to how we view North Korean statements on nuclear weapons, because none of this has any follow through from the Russians. None of it has follow through when it comes to these nuclear weapons. They're not making any of the moves necessary that would actually result in a nuclear weapons usage. And again, what would stop Russia or any other country from getting the message from this that, yo, if we have nukes, we could just do whatever we want and fail miserably and we'll still get something out of it?
Territory just because they have nuclear weapons. I think it sets a bad precedent on the world stage. I think Russia should be punished very harshly for their aggression, which they are. And I think that
economic sanctions.
Sure. Well, but if they endure the economic sanctions for however long what they're trying to do,
we can double down on that. I mean, we're not going all out with economic sanctions. We're not sanctioning American businesses who have like ties with Russia. So we can double down on economic sanctions, go harder on them.
Sure.
Right. So I'm not opposed to any kind of like extreme economic pressure. I do think they should be punished economically, and they are being punished right now. And I think Putin's probably going to die in a few years. He's an old man. He probably has health issues, right? So I think, but just again, the goal of American government.
I don't know why we're bringing up Putin dying. I don't know why that's relevant.
Is to protect the American people.
Like if Putin dies, it doesn't mean the regime collapses. There are other people who can take his place. Could be Shoigu, could be any number of people.
And part of protecting American people is protecting American interest abroad, though, right? Like you can argue World War II is kind of like protecting American people, right? Defeating Hitler, even if we ignore the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor.
Are you pro-war in Iraq?
Okay, it feels like Destiny gave a great example of something that it would have been good for the United States to intervene in even before Pearl Harbor. Not only morally, but I even think in the interest of the United States, when you see how much trade with Europe and a democratic Europe benefited the United States after the war when it comes to trade and the rebuilding of Europe and people who bought American products. But then he has to bring it over to one of the worst invasions in U.S. history as a comparison because Destiny was using a good example.
Not really, no.
Well, why? That was protecting American oil. We need oil to survive.
No, it ostensibly was for fucking WMDs, but the pretense for Iraq was tenuous at best. But I think like Afghanistan, I think was justifiable, probably at the very least, for punishing the Taliban and going
Well,
up Al-Qaeda.
the war in Iraq, the official reason was weapons of mass destruction, but in reality, it came down to military spending and like all that shit. Like that was not the real reason we went to Iraq.
Really, it was all military spending and all that shit. Yes, I saw the Intercept article on that. It said military spending and all that shit. I forgot that.
I mean, I'm assuming you would acknowledge that. We weren't really worried to have weapons of mass destruction.
Maybe, I'm not sure. It's more complicated, but yeah, I guess for Ukraine, I think that we should continue to support them. I think they've done a really good job so far. I don't know why, when they're on the verge potentially of ending this conflict.
Like, okay, so I don't want to get into a conversation about Iraq. There's a million different reasons why we went to war in Iraq. WMD, not falsification of evidence, but like we're taking evidence that is just really floppy at best to try to justify invading Iraq to look for WMDs. That obviously was one of the reasons we invaded. I think another reason we invaded was that Bush really just hated Saddam. Obviously his father fought a war against Saddam Hussein in Kuwait, and he doesn't like Saddam himself. And there was a lot of people who kind of saw this as a crusade for democracy. Even though democracy has to come within, it's very difficult to try to implement it from outside. The only example I could really think of that it succeeded would be like Germany and Japan. And that was a national security priority. We were attacked first. There could be some defense, but there's a million different factors as to why we invaded Iraq. Yeah, so I don't want to get into it too deeply right now. We should hopefully move back to Ukraine.
Conflict, even if it's dragging out a bit. I don't know why we would pull our support now and say, okay, Russia, now that you've been almost completely repelled from this country, we're going to stop completely, and now we're going to come to the table. We're going to give you back Crimea, which is not your territory to begin with.
Well, because let me explain to you why. Okay, so Putin, I think, is a okay, let me just, I'm going to answer your question, but let me just quickly ask you another question. I will answer your question. Do you think Putin is a rational actor right now, or do you think he's acting illogically?
I think he's pretty rational.
Okay, I think he's semi-rational, right? I think he's semi-rational, but I think he's also living in a bubble, right? He only has sycophants around him, right? He's not really, he's not like the U.S. president who's talking to various sources, right? He has various experts.
From what I've read, that he is very terrified of public appearances. I've also read that he's possibly terrified of COVID, which isn't too crazy when you think about how up in age he is. But it'd be really funny if he was like a hardcore masker in private. Doesn't tell anybody, but he's like super like, everybody better have their Moderna shots, okay? Not triple boosted, quadruple boosted, okay? But yeah, he's like, a lot of times he's spending his times in bunkers surrounded by his closest advisors and friends and yes men, yeah.
Experts. It's just a bunch of sycophants, right, around him, right? He's very insulated right now. So I think that Putin isn't going to jump to the nuclear option unless he has no other way out. The consequences for Putin of being pushed out of Crimea and the Donbass region is probably his death and at the very least him being exiled. He doesn't want that. So he cannot afford to completely lose this war, right? And if he's the kind of guy who's acting semi-logically, so what's going to happen now is Ukraine is going to slowly keep pushing back Russia, right? And Russia's going to do another maybe fucking draft, right? Or they're already doing a silent draft, but that's probably not going to work because we're stepping up our aid to Ukraine. Ukraine's going to keep pushing them back. Then we're going to get to Crimea. And then Ukraine is going to go after Crimea. And when Putin's hanging out by the last strand, he's looking at it, he's like, fuck, I'm going to lose Crimea. You know what? Fuck it. I'm going to get killed anyway. Let me drop one nuke on Ukraine. And maybe the West is just bluffing and they won't do shit.
I just don't see it. Because the thing is, if he is to use a nuke, I think the odds of him getting killed are a lot more likely. And also, this also assumes that if Putin was to give the order in the scenario, that like the generals would follow through with the order, which we've heard from leaked. I don't know if it was leaked communiques or exactly. I gotta go dig up the original source, but that the Americans and the Chinese were negotiating to make sure that China doesn't send weapons to Russia to assist with the invasion. And one of the things that were negotiated was that the Chinese would actually talk to Russian generals to convince them that if they ever get the order, they should not go through with the use of a nuclear weapon. So I don't even know if they would, if the order was given, whether it would be followed through on. Because in the scenario where like the Russians are getting cucked and they're all the way to Crimea. If they're all the way to Crimea, this could be a situation where people are already questioning like Putin's legitimacy as a leader, his intelligence, whether he's competent, whether he knows what he's doing, whether he has a plan. And then he gives a crazy order like that. We don't even know if he would follow through with an order like that. Anybody given that type of order?
I don't understand why this.
Or I'm dead.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I just don't know why we wouldn't just apply this exact same logic then to NATO countries. Can you explain me why that wouldn't be the case?
Well, because we have a military alliance with NATO. We have promised that attack on one NATO country is attack on all.
Yeah, but who cares?
Well, because.
Wait.
The difference between having a military alliance and not having a military alliance? Like, what do you mean?
What do you think is the obligation of the U.S. president? The most important thing for him to do?
Protect the American people.
Okay, if Poland gets invaded and we go to war on behalf of Poland and we cross swords with Russia, is that good for protecting the American people, or does that escalate our chance for nuclear war?
I think it escalates the chance for nuclear war, but I think it is different when we have a promise, right? So we're looking like NATO. Like they're different countries, right? But we're part of like one unit, right? So NATO is much more part of like the U.S. than, for example, a country like Ukraine, which we don't have any kind of formal military alliance. So yeah, I do think it would be pretty bad if we just let NATO crumble, right? Because then that would open up the door for all kinds of like crazy shenanigans. But again, this is not what's being like discussed here. We're not talking about a country that we have a military alliance with. We're talking about a country we have no military alliance with, who is facing a struggle with, its.
Okay. Let's say that I buy all of this, okay? What if it was the case that it seems like Ukraine is going to win anyway, even without U.S. help? Should we go in and invade Ukraine and damage them?
No, I don't think we should invade Ukraine.
Wait, why? What if Ukraine is on the verge of winning? Wouldn't that push Russia towards dropping a nuclear weapon all the same?
I don't think Ukraine is going to be on the verge of winning without American massive.
Well, but no. Let's say hypothetically. Let's say they were. Wouldn't that increase the chance of nuclear war?
Well, I think we should. Again, I think we should take the role of mediator. So in that situation, we should mediate. Like we should.
Yeah, but then let's say Ukraine says no. We've got borders from 1991 that we want the rest of the world to respect. Russia already agreed to follow them. We literally gave up our fucking nuclear weapons in '94 so that this exact thing wouldn't happen, and now it's happening. So
right, that's a bad situation. But our hands are tied at this point, right? Our hands.
Yeah, no. But I'm hold on. I'm asking us to remove from this point.
Things we can do. And
I'm saying remove ourselves from this point. I'm just asking if you would apply the same logic. If you would say, okay, listen, I understand Poland that you're really mad, but like you guys have to understand that if you win, or I'm sorry, not Poland, Ukraine, you guys are really mad, but you got to understand, guys, that if you win this war against Russia, it might move the world towards nuclear war. So you guys aren't allowed to win.
We should have a private discussion with Zelensky about that, sure. But at that point,
no, stop. Hold on. You're avoiding the hard question. Zelensky says no. Zelensky.
Also, can we we'll go back and we'll finish this debate after I have a separate debate, which we're about to have, or conversation, whatever it turns into. But something to consider here. Oh man, I immediately lost my train of thought. Oh man, I immediately lost my train of thought. What were they saying?
That's sure, but at that point,
no, stop. Hold on. You're avoiding the hard question. Zelensky says no. Zelensky says no. Fuck you. I want my country back. There is no diplomacy to be.
Oh, something that this. Okay, I remembered it immediately. So, I think a lot of what's being missed here is the big picture. What the Russians want, and they've been semi-open about this. If you listen to the people who actually work in the Russian like foreign apparatus, like the people who are working in like the Russian version of the State Department, their diplomats, stuff like that. The Russian foreign policy is built upon them eventually having either influence or complete domination over the entirety of what is now considered the post-Soviet sphere. We're talking about not only Ukraine, but Moldova, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. We're talking possibly Finland. We're talking like a bunch of other states, like Romania, like a bunch of countries that they have no business telling them what laws they can and can't pass, who they can and can't trade with, what alliance they can and can't join, that they want to dominate. That's the long-term goals that they are moving towards. And this is one step forward in this goal. There's another element to this of Russian nationalism. I mean, there's Russian nationalism in all these examples because Vladimir Putin seems to believe that Russia deserves an empire. And of course, when we talk about Ukraine, they believe that Ukraine is like fake. They're not like a real people. They're basically like mountain Russians or whatever they're going to call them. They're self-hating Russians. But the goal of them is to dominate the post-Soviet sphere. And so if that's their goal, why is it such a radical thing for us to make the assumption that if Russia was to succeed in Ukraine, that they would move on to another country like Moldova, who doesn't have NATO protection to stop them from invading and currently already has Russian troops deployed in internationally recognized Moldovan territory in the quote unquote like state of the like semi-proxy state of Transnistria. What would stop the Russians from invading Georgia again? We saw them threatening, the Russian foreign ministry threatening on Twitter, threatening to invade Georgia again on Twitter over protests against the foreign agent bill. Just something to keep in your mind, that the idea that like, you know, they'll take Ukraine and then Russia will be satisfied with its tiny little new empire. I think, you know, we're really giving them too much credit here. Okay.
We had where Ukraine is like, we're going to give away Crimea if we're winning, right? So I'm asking, in that situation, that say Ukraine is slowly and surely making progress, okay, and they're on that path without U.S. assistance. Let's say they can do it now without U.S. assistance. What do you do at that point?
There's really nothing you can do besides.
Also, we've been streaming for 2 hours in the studio, in the Dylan Burns TV bunker studio in Kiev, the war-proof studio. It's not war-proof, but I like to think it is. If you guys want to support the channel so I can keep doing streams like this and keep working on the journalistic content that I'm doing here at Dylan Burns TV over here in Ukraine, you guys want a quick peek at my next YouTube video? Here it is.
Yeah, I think a good thing to start with would be...
Okay, that's all you're getting. Look, boom. You see people we're interviewing. That's all you're getting. No more information. Boom. That's it. That's it. That's all you're getting. If you want more stuff like that, then you can support me at DylanBurns.tv. DylanBurns.tv. Okay? You can go to my website. You can sub. You can donate. When you sub on the website and not on Twitch, all of the money goes to me and my editor. None of it goes to Jeff Bezos. But I'll take gutter chat subs as well. Definitely if you got a primer, because then that doesn't cost you a dime. Also, if you don't like to support me through those means, you don't want to donate and have your message read on screen so I have to respond to it or anything like that, then you can also support me on Patreon. Dylan Burns TV on Patreon, which I greatly appreciate. Where were we? Yeah, here we were.
As trying to be the mediator. Because the only other option, okay, we're talking about the difference between providing direct military aid to a country and the difference between invading a country that generally has a Western alignment in order to please Russia. At that point, it's just a fuck situation. There's nothing we can do. Fortunately, that's not the situation right now.
Okay. All right.
Like in theory,
you don't think it would weaken the resolve of NATO at all if we're too scared to intervene because of potential nuclear warfare?
In a NATO country or non-NATO country?
In a NATO country. Like let's say Russia finally takes over Ukraine. Let's say they take over all of it.
Thanks for the bits of trash.
Let's say that Russia starts positioning strategic nuclear weapons or tactical nuclear weapons on the western borders of Belarus, western borders of fucking Ukraine, and they start looking at Hungary. They start looking at Poland. What is Alex going to be saying now? Like that they position those weapons. Is Alex going to say we need to start flying jets and shit to defend our NATO allies with those nuclear weapons positioned on the borders? Or
I think you have to defend NATO allies, yeah. But I think, like, fortunately, like you're talking about a hypothetical that's not happening and not even close to happening. That's not the example right now. Like Russia right now. That's why, again.
No, I understand it's not happening right.
Yeah, it's not happening right now, but that's why it's a scenario. It's a hypothetical, right? We're trying to see if this logic that he has for this war, if applied to another situation, would stand the test. If it's something that is like a good, if it's a good, like, foundation to build our nuclear policy on, if it's a bad one that would be fragile and lead to us having to back off of supporting our allies.
To bring up World War II shit, but like when we think about like appeasement and stuff, it's so cringy, but like we have to think about what'll happen next. That's the whole point about foreign policy, is setting the standards for setting the standards for how the world stage is played out, right? If you do these actions, these are the repercussions that you're going to suffer. So it's not just this one thing. It's setting the future conduct for all other foreign affairs.
Right. And like, I don't understand why it's the U.S.'s job to intervene in every single war. Like, I don't think that's
every single war. There's
nobody said it was the job of the United States to intervene in every single war. Dude, I'm trying to remember this quote from the Boondocks, the cartoon. If you can't look, you can't do if you can't do everything, do what you can.
wars going on right now in other continents that we don't give a fuck about. This isn't every single war. This
So,
is
so why are we so obsessed with this one?
because it's Europe, bro. It's our fucking continent.
Are white people better than like Asian people or black people? Like, well,
Yeah, we are, but it's not just about racial superiority.
What else is it about?
Because there's a couple of things that make this
Jesus
special.
Christ, doesn't he?
One is because in 1994, 3 countries, I don't remember them, it was Belarus, Ukraine, and one other shit country. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that. 3 countries gave up their nuclear weapons in 1994. The
I
Budapest
think it was Kazakhstan.
memorandum saying we're going to give up our nuclear weapons, and in exchange for giving up our weapons, none of you are going to invade us, right? And there were signatories to these agreements. The United States was, Russia was, I think Germany, France, and some other loser country was. We all agreed that maybe Kazakhstan. We decided to we're going to not invade these countries. We're going to respect that when you give up your nuclear weapons, okay, to decrease nuclear proliferation around the world. We made that agreement, and now their shit is getting invaded and fucked. Okay, so we're saying that one, our word means nothing in terms of that agreement. We don't give a fuck anymore if somebody invades you.
Wait, we also had an agreement that we're not going to push NATO west of, I think, was it Germany or something like that?
East of Germany? No. Okay.
We broke that.
Wait, hold on. Number one, that conversation in particular between State Department Baker and Gorbachev was about militarizing East Germany. That not 1 inch eastward, not 1 inch eastward. That wasn't a formal agreement to never expand NATO. If it was, they should have gotten in writing. But 2, even if that was an agreement, that was an agreement made between the United States and the Soviet Union. Okay, that was a conversation in 1990, I think.
Dude, to say that the agreement made between the Soviet Union and the United States about the expansion, about the reunification of Germany, should still apply when the Soviet Union no longer exists. Like, the Soviet Union collapsed. Geopolitics are going to rechange and reassess and morph afterwards. Like the power vacuum was going to be filled, and the people, and it wasn't like we marched the evil armies of NATO forward. The Poles asked to join NATO. The Hungarians asked to join NATO. The Estonians, Latvians, Lithuanians really wanted to join NATO because they knew once Russia got back on its feet, it was going to be coming back. These people wanted to join NATO because they were scared that they were going to lose their sovereignty to another power coming in, conquering them, reasserting themselves. If we were to keep this rule that like we just didn't expand NATO eastward, we just kept NATO as it was before, then what would stop Russia from just like slowly creeping back and just replacing the Soviet Union with just a Russia empire in the future if all things played out similarly as they played out now? Some would say that it wouldn't have played out similarly as they played out now, but I mean, Putin, like, he got in office in the year 2000, man. Like, it wasn't that long between the collapse of the Soviet Union and his rise to power, man. And it's not like he's the only Russian nationalist in Russia. And he's not the only person that was pushing Russia in that kind of right-wing nationalist direction. I do think maybe we could have done more to drag them together, but like what's said was done, as you know, when it comes to Russia. Like, I do think we maybe could have done a little bit more to try to, you know, maybe we try to like Marshall Plan it, but who knows?
That the Soviet Union dissolved. The idea that any of those agreements made would still be reflected today doesn't make any sense. Also, all the Baltics joined NATO. Like, we've already moved NATO eastward, so that's not even relevant to this.
Well, I know we break our word and Russia breaks their word.
No. I don't know why we would ever think that Russia would have a say over whether other countries can join our military alliance. Why would that ever be the case?
Because the deal we had with Moscow was that we're not going to push NATO. I'm not saying that it was.
We didn't have that deal. That deal didn't exist.
We did not. Really, you're saying we did not have a deal with Moscow, that we're not going to push NATO in the military, and we like now have weapons in Turkey and stuff like that? Like, you really
Correct.
think
I promise you. Yep.
Okay, I need to fact check you on that.
Yep, you can look at it. It's not 1 inch eastward. It was a comment that Baker made to Gorbachev behind closed doors. Gorbachev himself has come out and said there was no formal agreement not to expand NATO, and that the conversation had
Gorbachev kind of flip-flops on it, but that's not, it still looks bad for Gorb.
do with the militarization of East Germany, because we were talking about reunification of Germany. Remember, at the time these comments were made, there was the Warsaw Pact was in place. All of those countries, the Baltics and everything, they were either part of the Soviet Union or they were already part of the Warsaw Pact, right? It's not like NATO had any place eastward to go. It doesn't even make sense to think at the time that in 1990, the Soviet Union, when we're talking about NATO taking over countries that were already part of the Warsaw Pact. It doesn't make any sense. I promise that you can go look at, you can do research on it. You don't have to believe me.
My chat seems to be pretty split, but
no, I know, because a lot of people spread this meme about the not 1 inch eastward comment. But go look up that where it was leaked, and then Google formal agreement: United States, Soviet Union, expansion of NATO. It does not exist. It never exists.
Even if I take you at your word and say
sure, which is fine.
America breaks its word all the time. Okay, it's not like we're this like arbiter of great and we do all these great things. Like, okay, like two wrongs don't make a right. But America has broken its word. America has committed war crimes. America has committed torture.
Sure, but when we break our word, it damages our credibility as a country. It's really bad. We should try not to do that. It's really, really, really damaging in the United States. But especially in regards to military shit. Like, this is like a free and prosperous Europe.
Did America say that, hey, we're going to directly get involved in this war if Russia invades you?
Well, they didn't know this would be the specific war that would happen, but we said that we would defend them if there was any incursions on the territorial integrity.
We didn't specify how we would help them in this occasion, so it could have just been like, here's some guns, or it could have been American troops on the ground. There was no specification of that, I don't believe. Say it directly, but we've done agreements with Europe and with the expansion of NATO and with the cutting of the way the world works now that has led to like the largest period of peace in Europe. And part of that has had to do with these huge multi-country organizations, whether it's NATO or the UN.
Globalization,
people,
baby.
We get people to sign off on it, that what NATO countries are all agreeing to, that the UN is letting us do it, blah, 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 blah. And because of that, Europe's been a relatively peaceful place. I don't know why we would let Russia fuck all that up because of some ego bullshit.
It's not ego bullshit. It's self-preservation, my man.
No. He described it as ego bullshit earlier. He was talking about, we need to help Putin save face. It literally seems like we should be compromising the territorial integrity of Ukraine, signing millions of people off into territorial occupation, and possibly just like straight up execution, almost certainly execution from what we've seen from the quote unquote Russian cleansing operations. We should sign them all off so Putin can save face. It's ridiculous. It's silly.
No, there's nothing self-preserving about them invading a country.
No, I'm looking as an American. Like, I don't want to die in nuclear Armageddon.
Sure, but then why defend Poland then if Russia invades?
According to every single foreign policy expert, we're closer to nuclear Armageddon, World War III than we've ever been. Like, we're closer to...
Yeah, but...
I don't know. No, that's not true. Not every single foreign policy expert says we're closer to nuclear Armageddon than we ever been. I think the Cuban Missile Crisis was much closer to nuclear Armageddon than this. And I think most experts would agree with that as well.
But Russia's pushing that.
Things are not good right now.
Yeah, Russia's pushing that, though. They're the aggressors.
Right, and we're contributing to it.
By not giving it. Okay, but then again, then what you're just saying. So then let's say...
We're talking about directly providing military aid, over $100 billion.
Sure, but then again, I would just ask...
We're not talking about us just like standing around, like just doing nothing. We're talking about literally getting, semi-directly involved in this thing.
Sure, but like Russia invades Poland and all your arguments are still the same. You're saying, well, it's a military alliance. That doesn't have anything to do with a nuclear war. Nukes don't care if we're allied to the country we're dropping them in or not. Like, it would be the exact same argument.
No, it wouldn't be, because we have a formal NATO alliance. Like, I think there's a big difference between a NATO country and a non-NATO country. Also, fortunately, I really don't think Russia's going to invade a NATO country. Because again, you said that Putin is at least semi-rational. You said he was rational, so he's semi-rational. I think he's smart enough not to invade a NATO country, because that would probably be a very bad look, especially now that he has seen how poorly his military performs with a non-NATO country. Yeah, he's not looking to start beef with any NATO country. I think the odds at this point in time of Putin invading any NATO country is like less than 1%. They're insanely small. I guess my question
at this point, yeah, but
this sounds like a really good case to put Ukraine in NATO so they don't invade again. Because, like, let's say, okay, let's ask Alex this question. Well, I mean, he obviously can't hear me, but why don't we ask Alex then, okay, let's say we do this and we give up all this territory, we do all these things, all these horrible things we shouldn't do, but let's say we did it. What would stop the Russians from invading again? Would you be willing to put troops on the ground to stop it next time, to make our word mean something? Why should Ukrainians even listen to us when it comes to signing this peace agreement, if it means that they could possibly just invade again next time? Definitely, since one of the Russian demands is demilitarization and neutrality, which, if combined, puts Ukraine in an extremely vulnerable position, which Russia could exploit in the next invasion.
I mean, like, if they take over Ukraine or if they maintain Crimea and they slowly, I mean, like,
they're not even close to that.
They're not right now because of how much the U.S. is helping, though.
Collapse.
Yeah,
right.
But like
now we're in a position to arbitrate and find a peace.
Yeah, but the peace, it's not peace if they hold on to Crimea. That means they conquered territory.
It's still peace. They have territory, sure, but it's still peace. There's no war going on. No one
played like Civilization or any like Paradox games or whatever.
No, I'm not a gamer. You know.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, like when you're in wartime in these games, like when you go to sue for peace, you're not allowed to be on the losing team and say like, okay, well, I'm losing right now, so let's just stop the war right now, and I want to hold on to all the territory that I'm keeping. The game mechanics won't let you do that. They'll say, sorry, you're losing the war. If you want to have peace now, you need to give away like all your land. Like if Ukraine is winning this war, I don't know, I would say to Ukraine, whoa there, buddy, time for you to slow down. I know that you're doing okay right now, but you're gonna have to give up that territory that the whole world agreed that you own to Russia because they've got nuclear weapons.
Okay. Well, let me phrase it like this. What do you personally...
Can we imagine the world went to Vietnam and said the same thing during the Vietnam War? Or Afghanistan during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan? Or to Afghanistan during the American invasion of Afghanistan?
personally care about more? Who the Donbass region belongs to, or nuclear Armageddon? Like, which one of those is like more
Both of those are important, but I think that
one of them has to be way more important.
But the thing is, all the foreign policy plays
is way more important than I don't really care that much who controls
all the foreign policy plays into itself, right?
I understand.
Like for instance, let's say here, what
dude, is it just me or does it look like? And and remember, I'm saying this as a guy who has a Minecraft head, but he looks like his thoughts. Somebody just brought this up in chat. Are literally about to burst out of his mind, like his brain is pulsating and like he can like barely contain them in his head as they're bouncing around.
What signal do we send to the
I don't know what it is about the sides of his head. I don't know why it's giving me that vibe.
World then if Ukraine falls? The signal that we send is if you don't have nuclear weapons, people can invade you and destroy you because we're too scared to fuck with them anyway.
That's a red herring argument. We're not talking about it. We're talking about
that is.
I'm not, because again, I'm not saying we shouldn't provide them with anything. Russia steamroll through Ukraine. I'm saying that at this point in time, right, when there's hundreds of thousands of people dead, there's, massive, the whole country's in shit, that maybe instead of provoking and further, like contributing to the conflict, we should just be taking the position of mediator and trying to find peace.
We're trying to mediate, but Russia doesn't want to have peace right now.
No.
They want to hold on to Crimea.
At this point, Russia wants to come to the negotiating table.
Okay, can I put out this message? And if somebody says, "Oh, I would love to negotiate," that doesn't mean that they necessarily are willing to negotiate number one, in good faith, and it doesn't mean they're willing to negotiate a position that's actually achievable. I.e., Russia might be willing to negotiate, but their negotiation is going to be. Their bottom line is Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporozhye, Kherson, and Crimea is annexed. Five Ukrainian oblasts on top of Ukraine being a neutral state, meaning it has no means for allies to come to its defense if Russia was to break this agreement and invade them again, on top of the demilitarization of the Ukrainian state, meaning they would also not have weapons to defend themselves next time. That position compared to what I believe is the moral position, which is Russia leaves Ukraine. These are two so distant positions. I don't see how you find the middle ground that either side would agree to. I don't. They're like, I guess the middle ground would be, right? Russia, okay, how about Ukraine becomes a neutral state-ish, but you give up Zaporozhye, Kherson, Donetsk, and, Zaporozhye, Donetsk, Luhansk, and Kherson, and, Russia gets to keep Crimea, but also you're a neutral state, so that balances out. Like that, it's just not going to work. It's just not going to work. I don't know. What is the agreement you're going to write up? Here's the follow-up question for anybody who calls for negotiation. And I'm not against negotiations. If we had negotiations tomorrow, that'd be perfectly fine with me. I just don't think it would end up anywhere. My question for anybody whose main point when it comes to this war is negotiate is, what do you think the proposal should be? And that's where most people start to trip up, because it's very difficult to write a proposal for this situation because the positions are so diametrically opposed. There's no win-win scenario here.
Negotiate to keep lands when you're losing. That's not how negotiation works.
Who made that rule? I don't understand. Where did that
it's the rules of the world. If you're losing a war, you can't say.
Where's this rule written? What?
On the battlefield, and it's paid for in Ukrainian blood. They're winning their war. It's their land.
Any kind of deal that both parties consent to.
But why would Ukraine consent to it?
Why would Ukraine consent to it? Because we're gonna stop giving them nuclear weapons. Or we're stop giving them more weapons aid unless they come to the negotiating table.
Okay. All right.
That would be a pretty strong motivator. Do you think if we said that, they would come to the negotiating table? Like, hey, listen.
No, I think Ukrainians would probably still fight. That's what I think. But I don't know, maybe not.
They can go through like a few months of fighting without military aid and U.S. military aid and U.S. intelligence, and then I think they will quickly change the tune after that. Literally, the big reason they're winning is U.S. intelligence, right? Like, if they don't.
Big reason, it's one of the contributors, but it's not the big reason. certainly is a contributor, though, that is underplayed in the media.
Have that, like they're not going to get that far.
Okay, sure.
I mean, I guess like my question would be like this. Okay, like, what do you? It's going to be a 2-part question. What do you currently, as things are, the way things are going? What do you see the risk, the potential risk of nuclear Armageddon? Like, what would you put? Or let me rephrase that. What do you see the potential risk of a nuclear bomb being used?
I think it's pretty low. I don't think it's going to happen, but I mean, who knows? I mean, anything can happen.
Just like try to put ballpark it.
Ballpark, I would say less than 5%. That'd be my hope, guess.
Okay. I hope you're right, but
I feel like because like a nuclear weapon being fired, there's several stages of authorization for this to happen. It's not like Putin himself is launching the nuke. Like we've come close to nuclear Armageddons in the past, and people have stopped from doing it. I don't think it's going to happen overnight.
No, dude, that's the thing. Russia doesn't work like the U.S., right? In the U.S., like I think if like when Trump was in office and he just had a crazy notion to like bomb like fucking Iran, like the generals would not actually follow through on that. Russia doesn't work that way. All the people who are the top of the Russian military are people who have proven loyalty. So in America, we reward competence when it comes to the military, generally speaking. In Russia, they reward loyalty. Competence doesn't matter, which is why so many of their top generals are completely competent at their job, right? Because their only qualification is being loyal to Putin. So if Putin says, let's launch a nuke, right? There's no checks and balances. The nuke is getting launched.
There are.
He can now make that assumption. There's been a lot of people to talk about this. That number one, not only have we already talked about this in this debate, but we know that there were negotiations between the Chinese and the Americans on stopping American long-range missile and jet shipments to Ukraine in exchange for a few things. But one of the things that was included was the Chinese trying to negotiate with Russian generals to not launch a nuke if Russia was to, give the order. Also, we don't know the status of the Russian nuclear arsenal after seeing the status of the Russian military. There's a good reason to put that into question of exactly what is the status of the Russian nuclear arsenal. We shouldn't bet the world on it, but it's a question to be asked. And also, do we really think that if it was a scenario where Russia is they've been pushed out of Kherson, they've been pushed out of Zaporozhia, the city of Donetsk is being sieged, and Crimea's liberation is coming, and this is all based upon Putin's government just failing on every level, that if Putin was to give the order, that there might not start to be questions of like, oh crap, has he lost it? Oh dude, oh snap, has he lost it? Just saying, to say it's a given, I think that's, I think that's not true.
Checks and balances. There are multiple people along the stage of
actually. Who do you think the checks and balances are? Who do you think
people that are involved in actually firing a nuclear weapon? It might be people on a submarine that have to make the choice to do it. It might be the other guy that turns, like they've got the fucking suitcase keys. It might be generals and people that relay signals. Like it's not like Putin pushes a button on a machine and then a nuclear weapon fires.
All the people who are in positions of power, people who are ultra loyal to Putin.
Yeah, but you're talking about loyalty in this, in a like, oh, like I'm loyal to Putin as my ruler. We're talking about like pushing buttons that are going to end mankind, right? My hope is that it would be pretty hard for a human being to be involved with that. I'm pretty sure there have been 2 different points. I think it was one in Russian history, and I think it was one in U.S. history during the Cold War, where the option was set before humans to end civilization or to start firing
apples and oranges, because it was a different. You're talking about the during the Cuba situation, right, with Kennedy. It was different. I've actually looked really closely into that story. So it was a submarine, and they were told that if they were under attack, they have the authorization to use nuclear weapons, but it was still up to them, the people on board, the captain, the 3 people, decide whether they were under attack. 2 people thought they were under attack. One of the guys said, you know what? I don't think we're under attack. They never got a direct order. They got no orders to actually launch a nuke. It was up to their discretion. One of the guys used his discretion to say, hey, I don't actually think America's attacking us. I think there's something else going on. Very different situation than someone directly at the top of the Russian chain giving an order saying, let's launch this nuke. That situation.
Do you think given that order, do you think they would do it? Do you think somebody would start firing nukes?
100%. I think that Russia does not work like the U.S. I think that, yes, I think if Putin gave the order, it would be done.
Oh, okay, well.
I think maybe the general will be like, hey, Vlad, you sure you want to do this, buddy? He'd be like, yeah, fuck them. They're taking Crimea, fuck it. And they would fucking do it. Like, and if they didn't do it, Putin would replace them within days. There's been, there's been massive purges, right, of like the Russian intelligence and whatever. Putin constantly does purges. He takes out anyone who he even suspects of being disloyal to him.
Uh-huh. Well, so I got my faith. We'll see. Hopefully, I'll bet you a lot of money on it, because if I'm wrong, then we'll all die anyway. So fuck it. But
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's a bet I want to win, 100%. That's like a bet I can't wait to win. Is like wind up in like fucking. I guess the second question is you said like 5%. What do you think is the risk if we just at this point in
Oh
time?
my god, I'm getting rated by everybody today. I got rated by IRI, I got rated by Matt Bender, and I'm getting rated by Stardust. I haven't talked to Stardust in forever. Hello, Stardust. I'm watching a debate about Ukraine after debating 5 conservatives at the same time about every issue under the sun. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Yeah, we've gotten a lot of raids today. Thank you, Stardust, for the raid. I hope all of you drama whores are ready for politics.
We do what I say, which is we just try to help mediate and like negotiate this. What do you think the risk is then of nuclear Armageddon?
I think it puts the world in a really awkward place where every single non-aligned state is now either looking to join Russia or the United States in some sort of military pact, and where non-aligned countries are rushing to get their own nuclear weapons because now like rules have been set to where like if you have nukes, you're safe, and if you don't, like Iran and North Korea already kind of proved that concept that like, hey, look, if you've got nuclear weapons, nobody's going to fuck with you and you can be literally as fucking insane as you want. But I liked the message before where it's like, listen, like even if you don't have nukes, like there are these different kinds of agreements or memorandum, like the Budapest Memorandum, there are these things in place. It's like, listen, like I know that you don't have nukes, you don't have formal alliances, but like the United States and other countries are going to kind of look out because we don't want people like to feel like they need nukes. I feel like Russia winning this war leads to more nuclear.
We're not talking about that. We're just simply talking about Russia taking like, I don't know, coming to the negotiating table and taking maybe 1 or 2 territories, right? We're talking.
Yeah,
about
no, that's what I'm saying. I think that's what happens because then Russia has conquered parts of Ukraine.
1 or 2.
So you think so? But you didn't answer my question. What do you think is the risk?
Like, what is the percentage, or?
Yeah, of a nuke.
By the way,
in that situation.
when you say 1 or 2 territories, that's not what's at stake here. Russia is currently controlling parts of at least 5 separate Ukrainian oblasts, and they under Russian law have annexed all 5 of them with a rubber-stamped quote-unquote referendum. So it's not 1 or 2; it's 5. I mean, the Russian demands are maximilist. How do you say it? Maximist? You get the idea. Or maximist in nature.
It's 10%. I don't know. This is like a macro. Yeah, I think it's a greater risk to worldwide
Maximalist. There we go.
security to allow Russia to conquer territory and keep it. Yes. Otherwise, I would have a different opinion on this. Yeah, I think that represents a risk to world stability. Yeah, I think it's.
What kind of evidence would you need to see for you to change your mind and think that maybe the risk is higher with the ongoing war rather than like a peace negotiation?
That Russia is starting to make verbal commitments to like nuke stuff once a certain line has been crossed, like i.e. I will nuke this if you take Crimea. The reason why they're always so vague about it, and they're like, well, you know, if our territorial integrity is threatened, like, you never know what we're gonna do, we might use the reason they're so vague about it is because they don't have to commit to anything, so they can saber rattle and get the fear that comes with having a nuclear arsenal without having to commit to anything that could, you know, have world-ending potential or have massive repercussions for the Russian government, which launching nukes would have, since the Chinese and the Indian governments would not like that, and it would probably lead to them agreeing to a price cap on Russian energy exports, if not a total embargo. Couchman 11111, thank you for the tier 1 being sub for 16 months. Hi, hello, back to you.
This is a hard one. I think it would have to be like a multi-leveled, like the problem is like all foreign policy is so interconnected. I don't know if there's like a single, like a stat or study. I think it would have to be like a big lecture by some foreign policy guy that would be persuasive to me, but it would have to be like a pretty involved argument showing that like,
there's been many lectures by foreign policy guys. I can send you a whole bunch of links.
Yeah, I know, but like there are also people that disagree with those foreign policy guys, right? So I mean, it's a hard one to.
So then that wouldn't do anything for your position.
No, but I mean, I could hear persuasive arguments. Like, I'm largely unconvinced by the Mearsheimer guy as the realist foreign policy dude that everybody always cites in terms of shitting on Ukraine and stuff. And I think his arguments are relatively unconvincing. And then historically, I think some of the predictions that he's made about Europe and the state of security in Europe were pretty wrong. So I don't really buy into that like foreign policy school of thought. But I'm also fucking musical dropout retard. So the problem is like Russia.
We both know you're not a retard. You're a smart dude.
No, I'm sorry. Russia has a history of highly problematic behavior, and it would be a shame if that continued through Ukraine, I think.
Well, so does the U.S.
No, not as bad as Russia.
I mean, they're both. It's like saying, like, what's worse, the fucking dude that stabbed you?
Also, would the response be then, if America's doing something bad in the world, that we should enable said behavior, so reward America for said bad behavior, and that's going to stop them from doing it again? How? If anything, I think it would encourage them. So, I mean, if we would apply this logic evenly, so would that mean that the world should be like, okay, America, if you want to keep the Iraq, then you can keep the Iraq. It's just a big oil thing for you. That's, you know, it is what it. No, the world should not do that. That's a bad idea.
To do that, like rob your house. And, like,
Russia is worse. I think we can say
that. They're both pretty bad.
No, Russia is way worse than the United States. It's not even close.
In what sense? I mean, we're talking, how far back we're going?
State-run media, where let's go back to
on human rights.
Wait. Let's go back to 1991. Okay, so let's ignore the Cold War, because there's a lot of foreign policy throughout the Cold War, especially in places like South America, was questionable. I'll admit that 100%. But from 91 onwards, dissolution of the Soviet Union, the Warsaw Pact, I would easily side with the United States over the insane shit that Russia does. Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, I mean, we do a good amount of insane shit too. Constant like fucking interference in other people's countries, government.
Dude, the invasion of Iraq is probably one of the biggest stains. Our continued supply of the Saudi government for the war in Yemen is also a big stain I would point towards. But it's also like, if Russia was more powerful, would they do more? Because they invaded Georgia, they've invaded Ukraine now twice now, and they were heavily involved in the intervention in Syria and some of the most brutal bombing campaigns, very brutal bombing campaigns. Honestly, I think if they had more influence, or if they were of a similar size as the United States, if you were to put a gun to my head, I would probably say they would probably end up doing more damage than the United States. That isn't to say the United States hasn't done damage and the United States doesn't need to improve and the United States doesn't need to correct its horrific actions. But I mean, if we're comparing, you know, Russia to the United States directly, that's the conclusion I would come to.
Overthrows and then having it like fire back.
Wait, since 91? Like what?
Since 91, okay, the Iran thing was the 70s. I believe there's been a few things that we tried to. Well, we got involved in Libya. That was a fucking disaster.
Libya. Gaddafi was so fucked. Even China abstained from voting to prevent the.
Yeah, now they have open slave markets.
Sure, yeah, because we didn't stay afterwards, and I understand that might have been a mistake. But like Iraq was a place that we went in and we did stay afterwards, and that was a mistake. I'm not going to say that. Sure, I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to say that Libya turned out great. That was for sure. That is for sure a case.
But worse now than it was before.
I'm saying that at the very least, the way that the United States goes about securing the support for these things isn't just unilaterally like Russia will do, where they just go in and they fucking do shit.
Well, Iraq was somewhat like that. Iraq was pretty unilateral. And the thing is, when we talk about Libya, while it was a UN endorsed intervention, a police operation to stop him from leveling Benghazi, we exceeded our mandate, and we did do that with the French. The French were the ones who were the most eager to do it, but we did exceed our mandate without an international coalition really backing us or the support of the international organizations that would make it legal on the international stage.
And shit is fucked, right? Like the United States doesn't go in and conquer territory like Russia did with Georgia or like Russia has with Ukraine.
That is the one difference. Yeah, you're right. That's the one difference. So the U.S. doesn't actually like stay in the territory. They don't actually like annex the territory. That is the one difference. Sure, I will acknowledge that. U.S. doesn't generally do that. I think both countries think that they're doing the right thing, right? Like I think Putin in his head has to justify. It's like, hey.
Also, I would argue that like our freedom of the press and
we have way better freedom of press. Sure, we have way better, first speech. Sure, I mean, First Amendment, freedom of speech. Yeah, I'll acknowledge that. I'm just talking purely in terms of like our military interference.
They have cheaper gas,
like both superpowers have. Equivalent. At the end of the day, it's like superpowers feel like they can interfere in other countries because there's really no repercussions because they have this massive military, and the U.S. has the biggest military on earth. So therefore, I mean, did you see the recent human rights report that came out? We basically criticized every single country. Like right now, we're really going hard on Saudi Arabia because they're no longer really cooperating with us, right? Even though we used to support them like 5 years ago, but now MBS isn't really on our side. So, we criticize every single country except our own, right? But the U.S., human rights record is pretty, spotty in the last decade. Like, with the myriads of incidents that happened. There was actually a really cool clip.
What is like the worst shit that the United States has done like in the past couple of decades?
I don't know. Let's talk about Guantanamo Bay or Abu Ghraib.
Yeah, but like, how did Guantanamo Bay get exposed?
Drone strikes, or I don't know. Where do you want to start?
Well, let's do one at a time. How did Guantanamo Bay get exposed? Wasn't it through U.S. journalists and U.S. investigation? We had the freedom of the press to do that, and then U.S. people were held accountable for that, right?
I'm not. Wait, hang on. I'm not disagreeing with freedom of press. I know.
Okay, wait, hold on. But this is really important because the difference is that
I think America is way better than Russia. I'm just talking about in terms of foreign.
Okay, well, you think they're way better, then we already agree.
But not in terms of foreign interference. We both interfere.
No. What? I'm showing the difference. If Guantanamo Bay happens in like Chechnya or a Russian territory, then they would cover it up and laugh about it, and it would be over. And if people found out about it, they would get pushed out of windows and stabbed 3 times on the way to the ground. But in the United States, we found out about it. It was a huge fucking scandal. We got really fucking pissed off at our leaders, and some people fell on swords for it, right? Like Putin literally fucking does uranium poison or plutonium poisoning for political opponents across Europe.
I know all that.
Sorry, go ahead. Okay.
Who went to jail for the whole Iraq fiasco? I don't recall anyone went to jail for for it was leaked through WikiLeaks, how we like literally have a policy of like basically allowing torture. Who went to jail for Guantanamo Bay? I don't think anyone went to jail for any of those things.
Weren't people discharged and shit over Guantanamo Bay? The soldiers involved in like they were
maybe discharged. I don't believe. Did anyone actually go to jail?
I would have to look up if there were formal charges. Somebody can look. That's a quick Google search away. But
I mean, maybe someone low level went to jail.
I don't believe so.
I mean, I could foresee that, but no one at the Pentagon, no one who was actually authorizing it went to jail.
I don't know if they were. I don't know if it was officially authorized to like rape prisoners. I know that we did like waterboarding and shit, but like Guantanamo Bay shit was just fucked.
I mean, at the end of the day, this is a sad reality. If we punished like actually.
I'm sorry. Hold on. I'm talking about the fucking Abu Ghraib. I'm not talking about Guantanamo Bay right now. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm saying at the end of the day, if we actually punished like legit crimes that the U.S. committed, every single president, basically since I think Eisenhower would have done time in jail. I mean, even Obama, who like I'm generally a fan of, like there was an incident where he authorized a drone strike that literally killed a U.S. citizen, right? Like I mean, like
authorizing a drone strike that happens to kill a U.S. citizen isn't illegal. That's collateral damage. That's not an illegal thing. Nobody's going to jail for that.
No one's going to jail for it, but that's murder. You killed an American citizen.
That's not murder. That's not murder. The United States.
That's manslaughter.
No, it's not. It's not. That's not how that works.
So it's like cool to drop drones on like random American citizens. Like I don't understand.
It wasn't the. Wait. Oh my God. Do I have a meeting right now? Oh my God. I'm fucking retarded.
What? What's wrong?
I thought I had something scheduled for tomorrow night, and it's actually tonight.
Destiny.
Yeah, fuck.
And then that's that.
Wait, let me make sure. Let's see what's
you type so fucking fast. You're going like
no, wait, we've got to. Okay, we only have 10,
like
15 minutes left. I can finish this debate. It's we're past the midnight mark.
Fuck, I thought this meeting was tomorrow.
We'll finish the debate.
I have it on my schedule for tomorrow. Oh fuck, man.
You guys see it as I'm winning this.
Can we skip it? Skip this?
Do you think, broadly speaking, the United States?
There we go.
Sorry, go ahead. Keep going. Do you think, broadly speaking, do you think the United States is better or worse than Russia when it comes to like handling of affairs, exposing and whistleblowing?
Better.
Okay, yeah. The United States probably does some fucked up shit, but I think in general, I think we do better than Russia.
Oh, yeah, we have a better human rights record than Russia, generally speaking. We have a better, we're pretty much better in like literally every single fucking way than Russia, with the exception of, I think, foreign interference. I think we both countries have a tendency to meddle in other countries' affairs. But I think
they have cheaper gas.
The way we do it is
they got that on us.
Probably better because we don't at least stay and conquer. We at least try to LARP around and say it's in a good cause. Like, hey, we're just liberating you guys from like oppression, you know? Oh, sorry, you guys have like an open slave markets now and everyone's dying. That's not our fault, bro. We didn't do this, bro. The second argument I would make is actually financial. So like I was looking at the statistics, right? So there's about 5 million homeless people in the US. I mean, I guess I would start off with this question. Do you think if you have to choose between supporting the war in Ukraine and ending homelessness, which one would you pick?
That's not how dilemmas are usually done, but I guess you'd probably end up saying ending homelessness, but that's not how politics works. You don't, because the money that's allocated for the military, you can't just take it and throw it over to homelessness. Like, we can't just take the javelins and give them to the homeless and that solves homelessness. We can't take old 1960, 1970 armored troop carriers that we're sending over to Ukraine because we don't even use them anymore and just give them to the homeless to house themselves. Like a lot of this, it's not that transferable. We can do both. I think we should do both.
I'm not sure. That's a hard one, but our budget doesn't really work that way. So, I mean,
well, just you're the president, you're the fucking dictator of the U.S. Which one of those is more important to you?
I feel pretty strong about the foreign policy thing, so it'd probably be the war in Ukraine would be my guess. But
really, rather than helping American people, really?
Yeah, I think so. Our foreign policy is really important. I think in a roundabout way, it does help American people that the United States is like the fucking like the signaler across the world for freedom and shit. As cringe as that is.
Damn, dude, I think you got to renounce your liberal badge and jump on the neocon bandwagon.
Well, that's, you know.
No. I think the correct classification would be, I don't think he knows what a neocon is. I think people just think neocon is when you're aggressive on foreign policy. That's not how it works. You have to be a conservative to be a neocon. You could call him a liberal hawk.
Oh.
I don't know if he's a liberal hawk. Just because you support Ukraine doesn't make him a liberal hawk. But if you wanted to call him something, you would have to call him a liberal hawk.
It was a Bush era Republican.
That's not like really a liberal position at all. Like, really, like you helping homeless people, like it's pretty important to most
I
liberals.
think helping homeless people is important, but it's not like it's one or the other. It's not like if we weren't supporting Ukraine, we'd be helping homeless people. Like, this money is not fungible. Like this money is like, we literally print it. Like, it's not like we're helping one and not the other.
Right, but we could take the $100 billion and use it to help. I'm not even actually saying we should focus on homeless people. I would focus on other things, but we could use that $100 billion on helping American people.
No, we're not. We're gonna do it. We could do that right now if we wanted to. We're not doing that.
We could, but that's what we should do. That's a better decision. That's a better use of the money.
If we stop sending the weapons to Ukraine, none of that money would be used for the homeless, and there would be no movement to take that money and use it for the homeless. I would say 80% of the people, because there are 20% that I think are doing this in good faith, but 80% of the people that want to stop aid to Ukraine do not want to take that money and then send it over to the homeless. If the people who are the people in Congress who are leading the fight against aid to Ukraine, we're talking about Matt Gaetz, Marjorie Taylor Greene, these types, if given the opportunity, they're not going to take that money and reinvest it into the homeless population. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, but we're not doing that. We're not going to do that. If we stop for war right now, we're not gonna give that money to homeless people. So it's like not even a thing.
I know we're not going to, but I'm saying we could. Like we're talking about.
No, we won't. We couldn't. We wouldn't. If we ended the war in Ukraine right now and we voted to do that, Republicans would say, no, I'm good. And it wouldn't happen. Like, we don't have the political power to end homelessness in the United States because of the amount of money and programs and everything it would take.
Right, but I'm saying there's nothing that says we can't take the money that we're spending on Ukraine and use it on our own people. There's no law against them. There's nothing that prevents that.
Well,
yes, there is. Like, once something is allocated for a certain part of the budget, you cannot take it and funnel it for other programs. I believe that's illegal.
The Republican Party that wouldn't.
I understand that it probably wouldn't get done. I get that. There's a very good chance it wouldn't get done. But there's nothing that prevents us from doing that, right? So,
but there's also nothing that prevents us from doing both. It's such a weird hypothetical. We can just do both. It's the Federal Reserve. We can technically make the money if we want as our budget.
Yeah, I don't think it's a really good idea to just keep printing infinite money. I mean, we're
technically not printing money to Ukraine though. We're selling them we're sending them weapons, right?
But that means that we have to pay for those weapons, right? Those weapons aren't free.
Maybe. I don't know what the state of
and a lot of the weapons are being sent through the Land Lease program, which means they're going to be paying for them afterwards. Not all of them. I don't know what the exact percentage is being sent through the Land Lease program, which was congressionally approved. Like, for example, I think 100 kind of armored vehicles were just bought by the Ukrainian government from Poland, and they're doing something similar with some American weapons.
The manufacturing of them and everything is, but
they're not free. I guarantee you, Boeing and Lockheed Martin aren't doing this for out of the kindness of their hearts. You think like the CEO of like Lockheed Martin is like, oh, don't worry, U.S. government, we got you on this.
No, I don't know what the structure of those payments look like. I'm just not sure.
Well, the structure of the is typically, at least during the war in Iraq, there was no bid contract. So basically, the U.S. would pay insane amounts of money to these, whatever companies like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, whatever. And that was basically the way of it. And I'm sure it's actually the same thing now. Maybe there's bidding now. I don't know. But the U.S. industrial complex is pretty well known for, not doing bidding and just basically taking people who they have relationships with, whether that's corrupt or non-corrupt. So yeah, I'm sure it's the same thing that's going on. They're paying them money. Like we are giving money. The U.S. government's giving money to these companies to give weapons, and then the U.S. government's taking those weapons, sending them to Ukraine. There's no mystery there.
Okay, well, I mean, if Republicans wanted to come to the table and say we're going to support a whole bunch of social programs, and besides supporting Ukraine, then maybe I would be. I'm
not against supporting social programs, by the way. I'm not like a Republican by any stretch.
Sure, I'm just saying that like the people are acting like the money is like fungible. Like if we don't support Ukraine, we could support these social programs, but that's just not the case. We're not supporting the social programs because we've got politicians that don't want to. It's not because we don't have the money for it.
Right. We're also spending this money on the war in Ukraine because we have a lot of politicians who are more concerned with geopolitics than they are the protection of American people.
Yeah, but I think geopolitics is part of that. It looks like the security of the world. I think
our position in like global trade and integration with the world, like if that was to fall, if we were to, stop doing all this international trade, we were not to be involved in the international community, and chaos was to descend upon you. Here's a great example. I think a lot of people don't realize how interconnected this war is, but a lot of people are advocating for the war in Ukraine to end, in part because how Ukraine acts as a breadbasket. It's a massive food producer, produces a lot of grain, produces a lot of food from its farms, and that food has now been stopped, causing the price of food in many areas in the world to go up, especially in certain impoverished parts of the world. But that's just one way it's affecting the world economy through our integration. So again, international stability, global stability has implications for Americans at home. I think a good example for how interconnected we are is just how bad it was internationally after the 2008 financial crisis in the United States reverberated into the entire world. The entire world had an economic meltdown.
Plays into like the protection of the American people, but I understand we have a disagreement on like how that plays out. I guess.
Yeah, I just don't see how like whether who controls the Donbass region in any way like helps the American people or hurts the American people. Like I understand from an ethical perspective. Like believe me, like I just want to clarify for your audience too because they might be confused on this. I'm not like a Russian apologist. I'm not saying that like in any way Russia's behavior is like justified, right? That's not what I'm saying at all. Like obviously what they're doing is like super messed up, and then you have war crimes being committed and whatnot, right? So that's my little disclaimer on that. The disagreements of what we should do about it. I'm just like, okay, how can we minimize harm and maximize good? And the way I see we can maximize good and minimize harm is by being the negotiators, right? Being like, hey, like, listen, we're not going to take sides in this conflict. We think what you're doing is fucked up, but we're not going to actually directly support this. What we're going to do is we're going to try to help mediate this.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. But I would take sides in this conflict. There's one side is clearly an aggressor, and I don't think I would be comfortable with a solution that has them ending up with conquered territory in 2023. That just seems a little wild to me. But
why would you care? There's a whole bunch of countries that take countries from other people, like other countries all the time.
I don't think that's in Europe. That hasn't been true for 30 years. That's exceptionally rare.
I still don't understand why it matters. Like, I mean, the only possible argument I could see why it matters is because, hey, my ancestors were from Ukraine, and that's kind of like upsets my Ukrainian roots. But like, if you're like someone who's not really identified with Ukraine, I understand why the Europe thing really matters.
Because Europe has been so secure and peaceful. Like there were so many people that were worried. One, a lot of people were worried after World War II that World War III was coming, and then two, people were really scared when the collapse of the Soviet Union happened. Like, holy shit, huge power vacuum, weird unipolar shit. That like, oh my god, like everything is gonna get fucked for security in Europe. And for the most part, Europe's actually been really chill. And it'd be sad if this ushered in a return to an era of a Europe that was constantly at war with itself. Because holy fuck, Europe has a fucked history of constant wars, especially during Cold War time period. Like there's so much shit going on.
Yeah, I mean, most continents do, but why is there a difference between whether there's turmoil in Europe and turmoil in Asia or turmoil in South America?
Because I think Europe are closer allies to the United States. Historically, we've got people from there. Worldwide, it's just we have closer alliances. But also, you say that, but our alliances in Asia are really important too. Japan and South Korea are very close friends to us. That's why we have a really keen interest in what goes on in the Southeast Asian region and those seas. That's why we have a big interest in what goes on with North Korea and their relationship with South Korea. Like we have allies there too that are also important. But I mean, like if China, like the Taiwan question is going to probably be coming up pretty soon. In terms of foreign policy as well. And perhaps how we let Ukraine play out is going to dictate how China plays out with Taiwan as well, maybe.
Well, what would you do in that situation? So China invades Taiwan tomorrow.
I haven't read enough on the history of that region yet to have a strong opinion on it, so I don't have a strong opinion yet.
But why does the history matter that much?
Well, because I don't know what like agreements.
I think it's not that surprising that any of people watch me, but if the Chinese try to blockade the island, I think we should run the blockade. That's what I think. I think we should support Taiwan. And the only way Taiwan wins a prospective war is with the United States support. And the war game scenarios that have been played out seem to somewhat be favorable towards the United States. As long as Japan, the United States, and Taiwan are involved. And we can use Japanese bases. But I would like to, in all intents, for all circumstances, try to prevent a war from breaking out in the first place through either negotiation with the Chinese to stop an invasion and to stop their subjugation of the island, or through deterrence, through strong deterrence. If they won't negotiate, then we need to make it so that the disincentives for invading, the fact that they would probably lose, which most experts seem to agree that if they invade right now, most likely scenario is that it doesn't end up well for them. Naval invasions are particularly difficult types of invasions to launch. I would like to put enough deterrence in place that they wouldn't even consider it. That if they tried to invade Taiwan, they would know implicitly that it would be bad for them economically, it would be bad for world stability, and it probably wouldn't even succeed. Make it so that invading Taiwan is just like a fantasy of the most hardcore Chinese nationalists. By the way, that's the peace position, because that means we avoid war. Think about it.
And everything are in place right now for Taiwan. And I think when it comes to, as much as I fucking hate history, for geopolitics, like political affairs relating to geography and countries, I think that like the histories and the agreements and everything in place and how countries have acted historically is probably pretty important in determining what I think future action should be. So,
well, we actually have more, I would say, of an agreement with Taiwan than we do with Ukraine. We have repeatedly, like the president, the VP has repeatedly said, hey, we will support you, Taiwan. We will militarily support you. Like, we got you, right? Versus we never said that with Ukraine before this conflict happened. So if anything, if the U.S. has to pick between Ukraine and Taiwan in terms of its commitments, it should definitely pick Taiwan, because we've given them our word. Basically, we protect them. So if you're pro-U.S.
Well, we didn't give them our word that we would protect them. Biden keeps saying publicly that he would, but then the White House kind of retracts it and says, well, one China policy, yada, 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 et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I do think something is being implied, because Biden has done it like a few times now. But there's never been a strong commitment that has stood the test of time to coming to Taiwan's defense. The Taiwan Relations Act kind of leaves it up in the air.
defending you.
I do think that we're leaning closer and closer and closer towards supporting Taiwan during an invasion, which I think acts as a strong deterrent towards Chinese invasion.
And you definitely have to be pro U.S. defending Taiwan.
I understand what you're saying, but I haven't looked at the history enough yet. But maybe, yeah.
Well, just assuming what I'm saying is true, which was we've given them our word that we're going to defend them.
Maybe, but if that's true, then I mean we gave Ukraine our word kind of as well. So I mean, like,
it feels like a very loose word. Like we said that
we literally had a memorandum.
Wait. You're telling me that Biden's saying that he would come into the defense before the White House retracts it and reasserts the one China principle isn't loose, but us saying in a memorandum that we signed with the Russians and the Ukrainians that we would protect Ukraine's territorial integrity if it was infringed upon is loose? I don't know. This feels, I don't know. I don't like that.
Before literally 100% said that nobody will invade with you, fuck with you, do any weird shit with your country if you give up your nuclear weapons. That was the whole reason.
Can we say we're going to guarantee that with our military?
I don't know. Did we guarantee Taiwan like military?
Yes, we have with Taiwan. We have actually said, hey, we will like defend you like militarily. Like
again, like he's really overemphasizing this. Like it's we really are not committed to that 100%. It's not. That would be if we committed to that 100% publicly, that'd be a huge break with the one China principle in the last like 50 years of American foreign policy around China.
I mean, assuming what you're saying is true, I'll very, very cautiously say then that we probably should. But again, I don't have the historical background yet on Taiwan. I'll probably do some research on it in the coming days. But I don't have that. But if what you're saying is true, then I guess I'd agree with you. But
yeah, I mean, like war with Russia potentially.
Wait, would you say that we should defend Taiwan then using those arguments, or would you say no, we should leave them to their own devices as well?
Would I defend Taiwan with military aid? Probably not, because I feel like that could lead to direct nuclear conflict with China.
Wait, it can't be direct nuclear conflict because you keep saying that we should defend NATO countries.
We have a formal military alliance with.
But didn't you just say we had a formal agreement with Taiwan?
No, it's not formal. It's just the U.S. president has said like, "Hey, we will defend you," but there's no formal military alliance as far as I know.
Okay, so nuclear.
It's weird that he wanted to use the supposed verbal agreement between American and Soviet officials about eastward expansion of NATO. That shows how we're backstabbers, but a possible verbal commitment that he is misconstruing, but a verbal commitment from Joe Biden to Taiwan, we don't need to honor that. Feels kind of like we have different standards here.
War and the ending of the human race is acceptable as long as it's a formal military agreement.
I think at that point you just have no choice. That's the issue, because I think it's apples and oranges, because I think with like if Russia was to invade, first of all, I think like just to clarify, once again, Russia is not invading Poland. That's not happening. The probability of that is like close to zero. But if that does happen, if Russia invades Poland, right? If we don't do anything in that situation, that completely means that NATO is useless, right? And I think that would probably in that situation, I would agree with you that in of itself would have a higher outcome of ultimately, not right away, ultimate nuclear conflict, because then Russia goes into fucking, the next country, into like Czech Republic, into like fucking like all these countries that are nearby, right? And that I think ultimately will have a higher outcome, because at some point the U.S. will.
What would stop the Russians from invading Moldova or Georgia again? What would stop them if we gave them these concessions in Ukraine? Hell, what would to stop them after a negotiated ceasefire in Ukraine from just invading Ukraine against once they lick their wounds in this scenario? Since he doesn't want Ukraine in NATO, he doesn't want Ukraine in the alliance. We need to negotiate with the Russians, and they're going to request neutrality. What do we do in that scenario?
We'll have to get involved, and at that point we're far off. So at that point we're probably better off with doing a very hard conventional strike, not using nuclear weapons, but try to dissuade Russia. Again, that still has a very high chance of leading to nuclear war. I just think it's a lower chance. But I think there's a fundamental difference in terms of risk between a NATO country and a non-NATO country.
Okay. All right. Well, anything else?
No, not really. Fun discussion. Did I get you to change your position at all? Or you're still exactly where you are?
Nah, 100%. I want Ukraine to dominate. I'm full on Ukraine, baby.
So
How's life been going? Anything fun?
Yeah, I don't know. Just doing live streams and shit. I talked to your friend or acquaintance. What's her name? The sex teacher. Oh, Ayla. What was it? Sunday?
Okay, I don't care. I don't care about the interpersonal drama between Destiny and the Orbiter Brigade. Okay, I'm as an ex-Orbiter on my independent Zuko arc.